Hi, my Wellish family. Today's guest is someone who does a lot of work in identity healing and the stories we carry about who we are. Jessica Graham is a narrative advisor and identity coach who works at the intersection of mental health and entrepreneurship. Through her Beyond the Story method and her signature program, Rewritten, she creates powerful spaces where women can process their experiences, challenge inherited narratives, and reconnect with their true self. Her work blends honest conversation, practical strategy, and deep identity level support, helping women lead their lives and businesses from a place of clarity and self-trust. Today, we're talking about who we are beneath the roles that we've been playing, how the hardest moments in our life have become the foundation of our most empowering stories, and what it actually looks like to rewrite the narratives that have been quietly shaping our identity. Jessica, welcome to Wellish. I'm so excited to have you here with me.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely, Jessica. So for our listeners who are not as familiar with your work yet, what first pulled you into identity and narrative work?
It's a very non-linear answer to that question. I feel like I've lived like a million lives. What initially brought me in, I would say my own recovery process 15 years ago. I reached the end of myself where I just woke up one day and realized everything that I had tried and everything that I knew to try just was not working. I wasn't getting a result. I wasn't getting off of this hamster wheel that I found myself on. And so that got me into therapy, which introduced me also to the 12-step program. I'm a Al-Anon member, and those two things really gave me a lot of tools that I had never been familiar with before. And all of that plays into now what I'm doing, but it took a long time to even get there. So there was like a lot of career shifts, divorces, like lots of identity shifting along that way. And when I reached a point where I started my business and really wanted to have something that felt meaningful and felt like it was something that I was doing that had like a mission behind it, that's when kind of coincidentally the identity work found me again, even though I wasn't coming into any of my business as like, I'm going to be a coach or I'm going to help women. I kind of came into business thinking I'm going to help them with their marketing and be very like strategic and kind of give like a 5-step formula to things. And it's funny when, things don't happen the way that you plan for them to. And so as I was working with women on their businesses, identity just kept coming up again and again and again. And I knew from my own experience of owning a business, it's like, that's the first time you're having to show up on this platform and talk to a bunch of strangers about what you do and who you are, and show up in a way that like is so unnatural. And owning a business is, I think, the biggest personal development crash course that you can possibly have. And so it's like you're having to really work through all of your junk in real time to make this thing work. So I knew then helping women actually do that with what helped me was going to be my new mission, and that's what got me here.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, so then since a lot of that does come with the identity work and like breaking that down so you learn yourself more in order to move through the business creation, what were the places that you felt yourself getting disconnected, or that you've seen other people get disconnected from their real self?
That's a really good question. I think I talk about roles a lot and the roles that we play. I think like a lot of people were saying they knew they needed to show up. Like, I need to show up in a networking call. I need to show up on a coffee chat. I need to show up on social media. And once I know that someone is watching me, I completely freeze up. I don't know who I am anymore. It's like you have this like out of body experience. So I kept hearing that a lot. And with at the same time this message being shoved down everybody's throat that like, you need to be authentic, show up authentically. And it's like, well, if I'm even struggling to be to know my authentic self in private, how am I going to show up authentically in front of a bunch of like, I don't even know who's watching? And so I think that was the common theme that people kept kind of coming to me with, like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to show up authentically. And then the question just becomes like, well, who are you? And that's when I think a lot of the roles come up of like, well, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm an entrepreneur. And it's like, those are things that a lot of them have been given to us, but it's not necessarily who you are at your core. And if you start thinking about that, like, who are you at your core? I think that's a very hard question to answer for a lot of us. Like, we've never really thought about it in the sense of it not being a role or something that someone else has kind of defined us as before.
What are those most common roles that you feel like you see? So like I know you mentioned those, but like I also think of like identifying as like the good girl role, or like that, or just even like socially awkward, or I'm an anxious person, like these labels and identities that we're putting on ourselves. And so then we're showing up in situations that way, not even considering that there are other ways that we could show up if our perception only shifted.
Totally, exactly. One of the common ones that I hear a lot now that I'd never noticed before is the ADHD. Like, people showing up on networking calls or anything and just saying like, well, I have ADHD or I'm ADHD. And it's like, what does that even mean? And why? Like, it's so funny that we've kind of like adopted these things as being roles. But I do agree with you. I think the good girl is a big one. I think the pleaser, the peacemaker, a lot of things, like the work that I like to do, one of the exercises that we kind of go through is like looking at kind of who you are, but in relation to the people that you're with. Because a lot of times, like, your identity might have kind of been something that was incubated in the little ecosystem where you grew up, right? And then you move out and you move on with your life. But so many people go back to their family of origin or wherever, and it's like they resort back to this old character, this old
For sure.
role. And then if you kind of peel that stuff back, sometimes that role is something that you kind of carry with you in life, in a lot of different scenarios. And it really shows up, I think, a lot in intimate relationships.
Yeah, 100%. And the like I like that you say that you revert back to those old roles, because then like with the intimate relationships, I feel like you kind of like, I don't know, like tap into those and they show up in places that maybe you wouldn't have wanted them to previously. Can you explain what is happening like on a psychological level?
I will explain what I believe happens. I don't know if I can speak from a psychological level, but emotionally, I think that whatever it was that, like, our first experiences as our brains are forming, it's like we're trying to make sense of the world as we're seeing it. But our little child brains are not wise enough yet, and we haven't experienced enough yet to really make things make sense from like an adult perspective. And so your little brain is just like creating all of these stories as things are happening. And then those stories really create these like belief systems. So we're coming into the world eventually as adults with a lot of like belief systems and biases and all this stuff that has been created when we were kids. And if we haven't looked back at it to really like untangle that stuff and really see like, is this mine, or is this something that like I heard along the way that I just assumed or somebody had told me? You're going to come into the world with all this stuff that is not yours. And so I think a lot of it, like, we get ourselves on these loops of like, whatever your belief is kind of forms your feelings and then your behaviors, and your behaviors are wanting a certain outcome. So like, if your belief really is I'm not enough, then a lot of times the feeling behind that is like, okay, I feel shame or I feel guilt. And then you'll loop into the behavior of, okay, I'm going to take on a role. So maybe if I'm in a relationship, I'm going to be the extra people pleaser and make sure everybody's happy around me. And in different situations, making everybody around you happy means that you're actually sacrificing your own needs. You're silencing yourself to like benefit whoever that is. And so then the outcome could be, well, this person now likes me because I made everything nice and they're happy with me. So I have to keep this behavior loop going because that is like the result that I get out of it. Or it could be the opposite. It could be that you didn't get that result, but your brain is still saying like, well, you got to try it harder next time. And so you're staying on that loop anyway. So that's my theory behind it. I'm not 100% sure if there's like science backed, but I'm kind of thinking that sounds pretty legit.
100%. Well, what makes me think too is that, like, I know that you've talked about that the most empowering identity shifts that we experience are from the hardest moments, but a lot of the time those roles are also created from those hardest moments because you have to learn to survive. So I just kind of think that that's interesting. Like, so for somebody that is experiencing that hard moment right now, how do they begin to see it in an empowering way compared to like continuing to take on more roles and be stuck in survival mode?
Yeah, that's where the narrative work really comes in. One of the exercises that we do is externalizing the problem. So like whatever your problem might be, let's say we'll stick with the people pleasing. So if I am people pleasing, then I can like whittle that down to what really is like the problem behind that. Is it that I feel like I'm not enough? Does it feel like you have a lot of, I always think like not enough is usually the core belief. So let's just go with that. You're not enough. And then once you know that it's the not enough is the problem, you can label that as something. So like in my life, a lot of my not enoughness comes up as I victimize myself. So I put myself in a lot of situations where that's the role that I take on, is like I'm the victim in this situation. And so if I'm going to talk about or journal about it or whatever and kind of start unpacking that, then anything that I can ask myself in regards to this problem, I'm going to name it. So if it's like the victim, some people even like to kind of characterize this as though it's like a little avatar. So you can even say like Vicky, the victim, or whatever.
I love that. I have Randy rumination.
There you go. So Randy rumination, if you're like journaling about it, it kind of, when you can start to unpack it, it's like, it becomes this thing that's no longer you, and it really is this externalized thing, which I think then helps to like lessen a lot of that shame and all the emotions that are around what this problem brings, because so many of us are on these loops and we're doing this stuff that like we know we hate it when we do this. We look back and we cringe at like our behavior, or we're angry at ourselves because we exploded again, or we find ourselves in a horrible toxic relationship again when you swore you would never do that again, or whatever it is. And so if you can start to externalize the problem as though like, okay, I'm doing this, but like, it's not me. It's not part of my identity. I think that helps a lot psychologically, because it helps us get off of that like shame loop. And then after you externalize the problem, that's when you really have to start like digging into what it is that you value, what your strengths are, to kind of counteract that. And that's where the alternative version of your story starts to emerge, is like you're now writing this like different version of the story of yourself where you are a strong person and you're not reacting or responding to life in this same way that you have before. And then when those things kind of pop up again, because that's part of life, is a lot of times, I think we talked about this before, that like the wellness space a lot of times gives you these formulaic approaches to solving these problems that we have. And it's as though, like, once you do this, once you work this program with me, your like problems are gone. You don't have to ever deal with this again. And it's like that's what brings people to a lot of frustration, because it's like you reach this point. Like, I've evolved so much since I started my wellness journey 15 years ago, but I still have a lot of the same triggers that come up. I still face a lot. Like, if I'm not keeping myself in check or like being very mindful and intentional with my decision making, I can easily resort back to old behaviors and patterns. And so I think, to answer that question in a very long way, the externalizing the problem is just like a really good way of taking the enormity of like the shame out of all of it.
I feel like that is a really good answer, because I think that it is a very clear indicator that you're operating from a story that no longer serves you. And it's easier to recognize that. Where like when everything is, I don't know, when you're trapped in like what I'll say is the shitstorm of your mind, that like you can't like necessarily identify one thing. You think that you're working towards something. You think that you're doing the self-improvement, and I'm going to use all of these tools that I've learned to not feel anxious anymore, to be more confident, whatever your thing is. And you are so inside and trying to go externally for the answers. I don't know. I think that like when you can come to that awareness that that's how you're spending all of your energy, compared to like how you're saying, getting to the root almost of your identity and like using your values. Because I think when you can identify your values, I don't think a lot of us do that. Like that you think that, again, shitstorming your mind, you think that you know, but you really don't.
Yeah.
So being able to kind of like come to terms with what your values are, understand what your values are, and then recognize how those values are showing up and what triggers you, and how you show up in the world, and why things upset you because they're not in alignment with them. So I think it's interesting.
And it's interesting too, because I find that like a lot of us will do this work within ourselves. And so we kind of get to this place of like, okay, I feel a lot stronger. I feel like I worked this out. In recovery, we see this a lot where like you enter those rooms, let's say you do have like a drug or alcohol problem. And now that drug or alcohol problem is gone, you actually realize, because you're sober, but you actually realize that like there's all this other like real problem stuff underneath. That was just the band-aid to try to like not look at this stuff and to not have to deal with it. So now the real work comes. And so as we do a lot of this identity work, I feel like we're doing a lot of it solo. And then when you're in partnership with somebody, I think like a lot more stuff ends up coming up that you did not anticipate at all. Because when you're by yourself, you're not getting triggered in those ways. You're not having the mirror in front of your face reflecting back to you all the time. And so I find it interesting because that's been my pattern, is like I feel like I can get into a really good rhythm of health and like wellness and feel very serene and peaceful. And then if I'm in a relationship again, it's like, where did all of that go? Like, where did my serenity go?
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that like I think a lot of it, what you were kind of describing earlier, like how we talked about that it's this formulaic way of getting through things. And like with that specific example of getting in the relationship, that like when you're single and you operate for yourself and, you know, you feel so empowered and good. And then you have this like, we'll call it a trigger person, like kind of comes into your life and messes with the way that you think about things. I think a lot of the advice comes back to like, well, you just have to insert X thing. I'm wondering, how do you actually start to rewrite the narrative in a grounded, realistic way instead of like positive thinking or just like, you know, being better?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is being like really honest with yourself. That's the first step. So like when I take people through the rewriting process, the first part of it is awareness, and it's just like becoming so awakened to your truth, and that requires a lot of freaking honesty. I think a lot of us, especially women, and I don't like to generalize in this way, but I do think that gender roles play a big reason for it, is that we have really found our roles and our identities through other people. And I think that when we start to strip that stuff away, it is, especially if, like, let's say you go into the motherhood thing and you go into the wifelyhood thing, like, you really are putting a lot of other people's needs before your own. And it's a very noble thing to do. And it's a very, what is expected of us to do. But in all of that, a lot of us like lose who we are. And so not only, and it doesn't even mean that you have to have had children or like partnership to even lose that sense of yourself. But I think most of us get into like our late 30s, 40s, and we're like, wait, whose life is this? Like, I have done all the things that everybody expected me to do. I did all the right things. I played the roles that I needed to play. And like, even if you got all the things that you went after, there's still some kind of unsatisfaction in all of that. And so when you start to really awaken to that, I think sometimes it can be a rude awakening, because it's really realizing that a lot of the things that you currently have or that you're living out is not aligned to who you really are. And then I always think taking an inventory, and the inventory is part of that awakening process. But it's like, you know, in recovery, usually you're doing an inventory the first time that you go in there. And by inventory, I mean like checking in with yourself to see like, what are my behaviors? What are my patterns? How have I been showing up? Where have I hurt people? Where have I lied? Not just to other people, but to myself. And usually that first one is like a biggie. And then after that, it's just maintenance. So it's like doing these daily inventory kind of check-ins with ourselves. And so those two things really help the process of like rewriting your story in a really from an honest place. Because like you said, I mean, we can put mantras onto anything and like kind of give ourselves a task list of, you know, okay, when we wake up, we're going to do this, this, and this, and like think that building new habits. And I do think building new habits is definitely a part of it. But the rude awakening, and like also in that rude awakening, being really, really curious, like just, I think that rude awakening takes like a few times. I don't think that it's a one and done kind of a thing, because you're really stripping away a lot of that conditioning and a lot of those expectations. So once all of that is out, then you can start rewriting it. And again, with the rewriting part, I always refer to the externalizing the problem and then really looking at the roles. I think that like that's another time when you kind of reach this point that's very uncomfortable, because if you have to be honest about yourself, you also have to be honest about the relationships that you have. And that might bring up some stuff that like, not just in romantic partnership, but your friendships, like there really might be some rude awakenings that come up when you're looking at who you're around and who you're surrounding yourself with and who you are when you are with these people. I think a lot of us have a lot of boundaries and codependency issues. That's been my biggest crux in my journey. And I think when you're in that place, it's like you're outsourcing a lot of your decision making to other people because you want to maintain like peace and harmony. And like, I just want to like make everything, I want things to be easy, but you lose your voice and your true identity in a lot of that too. And so that's a big part of rewriting your story, is like, who are you in this new story, and what are the roles that have been expected of you, and what are you willing to continue and what are you not willing to continue. And It can be pretty disruptive, you know?
Can you tell me how we do that? Like, how does emotional outsourcing and codependency shape someone's identity over time?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak from experience. Like, I think for me, codependency, like, I like the definition of it being, you know, outsourcing emotional outsourcing. And so it's really like I'm kind of looking at whoever I'm with as though, like, if you're not okay, then I'm not okay. And so it's very much like maintaining this harmonious kind of thing, even if it's not harmonious. Like, relationships, in my experience, like before I got into recovery, I had a lot of toxicity in my relationships. There was a lot of chaos. And so, but if I looked back at my life, the family that I grew up in and my home dynamic was very chaotic. And so that felt normal to me. If I was in a relationship that didn't have a lot of chaos and drama, I was like, something's wrong here. Like, we need to stir things up. And so I think when you're rewriting your story and you're really looking at those relationships and the boundary setting, it's really taking a lot of ownership over your stuff. I think that a lot of times we can be quick to blame other people for a lot of things that are going on in relationships that we don't like, but really, like, you're the common denominator. Like, you're the person that is there. And if this is a repeated pattern with different partners, that's also you're the common denominator. And that was a tough pill for me to swallow, because as the victim role, like, master, I was like, hold on a minute. Like, this was not me. This was not my problem. This is all of their problems. They made me do this.
That is the best realization.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like the toughest pill to swallow. But once you can do that, and that's part of the inventory, it's like, where am I not being honest about this? Okay. And then once you can really, I think, like, in boundary setting in general, my biggest issue is not like knowing that a boundary needs to be set. Like, I'm pretty good at knowing, like, this relationship definitely needs a boundary. It's more about communicating that boundary and then sticking with whatever it was that I communicated. I think that's been one of the biggest learning lessons as I get older too, because I think depending on who the person is that you're communicating these boundaries with, it can be a very tricky situation. And I think a lot of us are not taught how to have constructive conflict, like, because it is conflict. Like, you are telling someone, I don't like to be treated like that, and I'm not going to stand for that anymore, or whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be that dramatic, but and that's a very tough conversation to have. But yeah, I think, like, the boundary setting from the clients that I've worked with, I think that's been the biggest eye opener in the work that we do, and something that, like, continues onward. It's not, again, without all of this work, it's not a one and done kind of thing.
Well, and you talk about emotional outsourcing from a 12-step lens, yes?
Yeah.
So, like, that sounds to me then like exactly what you're saying, is that, like, it's not just this thing that you can do and be done, that it's a multi-step process. What, can you talk about that at all? Do you mind talking about it at all?
Yeah. Like, talking about how it's a multi-step process within.
Yeah, like, what is your 12-step lens?
Yeah. I mean, the 12-step lens really is, like, it is a spiritual program at the end of the day. And so I really believe, like, I was thinking about this earlier, like, with everything that's going on in the world right now, I think certainty is something that a lot of us really want more of, and we don't have it. And for my own belief system, I think, like, the closest thing to certainty that I can possibly have is having some kind of spiritual relationship in whatever, like, however that looks for you. It just gives you a little bit of, like, Okay, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Whatever happens, happens. So I think that's the biggest first step is like awakening to the idea that I can no longer manage what this is. So I'm powerless over this person, this situation, this substance, whatever it is. And now I'm willing to hand over this stuff to a higher power to help me figure my stuff out. And so that's the first part. And then it's the inventory stuff. And the inventory to me is like the biggest part of the 12 steps because you really are owning your stuff. You're keeping your side of the street clean. You're being very honest with yourself about what's going on because a lot of us can lie to ourselves about our own behaviors or about someone else's behaviors. And so that's the inventory part of it. And then it moves into, okay, so what do I do with this now? Like, what do I need to own up to? What do I need to actually take action on? And then comes the, how can I like take everything that I have learned and done and try to make the world a better place? Like, how can I now kind of support other people and right the wrongs in a way that I've created in the past. And so this little cycle just keeps on going.
I love that. That's cool. It's so true too. Like as somebody who's experienced that, like without knowing that that's what I was doing, like I wasn't doing it intentionally, but that is fully like the process. It was exactly the process that I went through without even, putting intention behind it, like I said. So I think that's really cool. I like that a lot. What do you think are some subtle signs that people are over outsourcing their emotional availability to other people?
I think these days the over outsourcing is really feeling like other people are responsible for the way that you feel. And again, I think this comes down to like the boundary work. Like it is not someone else's job, whoever they are in my life, whether it's my husband or my parents or a stranger on the street, no one else is responsible for how I feel. I'm responsible for that. So if I'm feeling a certain way, like if I'm feeling activated in my like situation with this person, then it's my responsibility to communicate what it is that I need. But it is not anybody else's job to make sure that I feel okay. If I communicate what it is that I need and they decide that they do not want to agree with what I'm saying, then I have every right to then take another decision and either remove myself from the situation or whatever. But I really think that these days there's a lot of talk around like, well, they made me feel this way, and so that's why I did X, Y, and Z, or, working at that place made me feel X, Y, and Z. And it's like, I think that's giving away too much power that you actually have. Like, I think that's the outsourcing of emotions that, and like as a former teacher, because I was a teacher for a long time, I see that a lot with the parents and the relationships with their children now and fighting their children's battles like on their behalf at the school. I think
Yes.
is creating a massive issue because it's like going back to the conflict, we're not being taught how to have constructive conflict. Not all conflict needs to be blowouts that, deserve TikTok like airtime because someone's recording it and you freaking out. It's like you can actually sit down and have a conversation, but you can't be doing it on behalf of other people. They have to find their own voice to do that.
I think that's such an interesting point, like that we don't have the conflict skills, because I think that was a really big shift for me when I was learning how to set boundaries. And that also was a process, like how we were saying, like I had to like creep towards the ability to set boundaries, but eventually was able to do so. But I think that once I was able to do so, I was mind blown by how it was not this dramatic thing. It was not this big blown out thing, because I had at that simultaneously been doing the identity work for so long that I know that I'm not the type of person that wants this sort of behavior in my life. And it's not a big blowout. It's literally just like, hey, I don't like that. Like, hey, oh yeah, no, that doesn't work for me. And like just being able to like remove yourself from the situation. And it's not like some huge deal. And I think that, you know, exactly to your point, that we're not taught that. And so we don't have the wherewithal to even know that it could be different.
Right. And it's so funny that you say that, because it's like, again, going back to what you grew up in. Like me growing up in an environment of chaos, like I expected every time that I would say that I'm really dissatisfied with this, or I don't like when you do that, or I don't like how that makes me feel, that it would be met with a big blowout thing. And so later when I realized like I could say this stuff and it's not met with that, I was shocked. Like I was really shocked the first few times that I actually used my voice to state a boundary, and it was received really well, and it wasn't like a big drama. And then your nervous system gets so used to that. And then it's like the chaos is no longer normal. Like when I am in a chaotic situation or when things are feeling off, like my nervous system is not how it used to be, where it was like, oh, this feels good. Like now it's healed and it's like, this is terrible. Get yourself out of this.
Yeah, totally. I kind of want to shift because we were talking about the identity a little bit. And one of the biggest ways that I feel like I was able to figure out who I am was through journaling. And I know you talk about journaling as a tool for emotional clarity and transformation. So, what do you think makes journaling so powerful for identity work specifically?
I think when we're doing the identity work, going back to like what my values are and who I really am, I always see that as like you're peeling back the layers of an onion to really reveal who you are. And this is like this is probably the life's work that we will have until we are no longer here. And when journaling comes into that, I think that it's almost like there's a way of meditation where you're able, when it's like pen to paper, you're kind of tapping into this like subconscious part of the brain that not any other really modality is going to like tap into as much. And so when you're journaling through, it suddenly, I'm sure you've had these experiences too, where it's like, whoa, where did that come from? Where this is like clarity that I didn't realize was here. Or the truth coming out feels so much easier because it is in this like meditative kind of state of mind. And so I think with identity work, having that clear space to be able to get curious and do it through journaling is like the best tool. That's been the most impactful tool for me.
I think what you're saying about like the subconscious being able to come through too is interesting because I've only ever been able to do that if I like set at least a 3-page minimum for myself for journaling. Because I think that where a lot of people get stuck and they fall off of it is that they're very much surface level journaling and not journaling in a way that actually creates change. And I think that once you kind of are almost pushing yourself out of your comfort zone in journaling, that's where that stuff comes from because you just have to keep writing. So you're trying to come up with things and suddenly you're like spilling out all this random shit onto the page.
It's so true. And I think that having questions like prompts really helps a lot. I know a lot of people get stuck because like a lot of people come to me saying, I don't know how to journal because they think like, it's kind of like, Dear Diary, this is what happened today. And then they're like, other than reporting what's going on today or even checking in to see how I feel, like, what else am I supposed to talk about? Like, what questions? And I always say, like, having those prompts helps so much because it's dragging something out of you that you hadn't thought about before. And it's kind of asking you a question that you have never asked yourself before. So I think to your point too, like writing more and having those questions like suddenly puts you in a very uncomfortable space where things can start to be revealed. And uncomfortable, I say that, but it's like comfortably uncomfortable.
Yeah, like it's not some intense thing that I think that
Yeah.
we like think it's gonna be.
Yeah,
Totally.
it's like stretching.
Yeah. If someone feels disconnected from themselves, what is one journaling prompt that you would give them?
I always love my inventory questions, and I think one that I rely on a lot is like, when did I say yes when I really meant to say no? Or when did I say no when I really meant to say yes? I think that can be a good one of telling yourself the truth about something. You can even look at your day and just kind of see, like, what did I say yes to today? And did I really want to say yes to all of those things? And then if there were things that you didn't want to say yes to, why? Like, what was it about that? I think that, like, when I do this work, I realize a lot of the roles that we're playing, again, like wife and doing the housemaking, whatever. It's like, I hate that shit. I hate that shit. And so then it's like, so how do I communicate this? And then it like brings a new kind of thing that you bring up to somebody, a new boundary, but you're able to work through something, and suddenly there's like a weight off of you that you didn't even realize you were carrying this weight. It's just these nagging little things that, like, I heard one time someone refer to these things as like open loops. It's like this thing that just kind of, you either, it just sits there. It sits there and you need to close that loop. You need to drop the rock. There's a lot of like ways of kind of framing it. But I think once you get to that honesty place and then you can move forward, it's like, wow, that was huge. So I think that would be one question. And then another one is like, did I tell any lies today?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I like that because even to yourself, like you had mentioned earlier.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
And I mean, did I say yes when I really meant no? That's kind of lying to
For sure.
someone too. Yeah.
For sure. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I like what we were talking about earlier about like the habits and like that no morning routine and adding habits into my life, while they are good for me, while I like incorporating the journaling and the glass of water and the workout and the breakfast into my life, that's obviously good for me, but none of that has ever actually been that like big realization like you're talking about. And I think that a lot of the time when we kind of turn to those things to create our identity because we think I want to be the type of person that does these things, compared to being honest with ourselves and identifying like where we're lying to ourselves and other people and showing up in ways that aren't actually reflective of who we are. It's when you do that then everything else kind of falls into place. It works the opposite way. So I'm wondering if there's a person there today listening that feels like they've been performing their life instead of living it, what would you want that person to hear?
That's such a good question. I would really want them to hear that no matter what their lived experience has been, everything is rewritable. And I think that in itself, like no matter what your experience has been, you can shift whatever might feel icky or shameful or whatever into a very empowering version of your story. I really feel like everyone has a story to share, and really your story to share is your purpose. We all have a message to be delivering. You're doing it really well with this podcast. Like you're following that really well. And I think so many people do, and they don't give their stories an adequate voice. And it doesn't even mean that you need to have a podcast or you need to have a platform, but it's just healing that version of your story and then knowing that that message is going to help someone else, no matter what the situation is. You're free to share it, whether you're meeting somebody for dinner and you're having drinks or you're hosting something on a podcast platform. Like, it doesn't matter. But really, your story is meant to be shared.
I love that. That's a good answer. What does it look like to lead from self-trust instead of survival or expectation?
Hugely different. I think survival looks chaotic, and it also looks very outsourcing your decision making. I'm speaking from personal experience. That's what I did for many years. And I'll tell you a story. Like when I went through my recovery process 15 years ago, I felt like recovered. Like I was like, I'm never going to go back to that old life again. Like I'm a new person. And then I found myself in my first marriage and I was like repeating the same patterns. Like I had regressed. And I was like, how did this happen? Like I don't understand what brought me here. And there was so much shame around that because I was so proud of like all the work that I had done. And then once we got a divorce, which was very tumultuous and like very chaotic in itself, I knew I had to go on this like massive healing journey. And so that started this whole like, I'm getting myself out of this career and I'm going to start a business and who am I and all of this stuff. And I really think that when I look back at like that version of myself back then, I was resorting back to like a survival mode state. And I was maintaining peace in order to kind of be in a survival. It was a very abusive relationship. And so it was like, I'm going to maintain the peace because I need to survive this. But when I came out of it, I realized like I had lost my voice totally. Like I had just outsourced everything to somebody else and let them make the decisions on where we were going to work, where we were going to live, like all the things. And I had to develop the self-trust again because I knew moving forward, I had to believe in my own decisions. And I think when I started my business, that was when that was like the most apparent. Like now you have a business that's relying on nothing but your own decision making. Like I don't have a boss to tell me what my targets are and what the job description is. Like I'm creating all of that myself. And it was the hardest, scariest place to be. So once I started to work on the self-trust thing, and it really is just like taking one little decision at a time and having so much grace with yourself and like understanding. I remember someone told me this at one point, there's not a right or wrong decision. It's just a decision. And I was like, what do you mean? Because I always thought there was a right one or a wrong one. And if you're presented with two that could be good, like it's not like a, black and white. It's like two things that this one could take you on this path, this one could take you here. I was so afraid of making that decision for myself. And so surveying everybody, what do you think I should do? What do you think? What do you think? And then like taking the, well, most people said this, so I'm going to try that. And then I had somebody to blame for it. Like then I didn't have to take ownership over the outcome of that decision. And it's like, what if you just make decisions, and if it ends up being like a sticky situation at the end of it, you just have grace with yourself and you say, well, I'm going to take another decision to kind of pivot off of that path and see where that takes me. And it's not this like huge deal anymore. And you build so much belief up in yourself again. Like it really has been the most life-changing thing for me. And then I see it in my clients all the time. I think the self-trust is a massive part of the work, the identity work, really.
Yeah, completely. I was going to ask you, what is one thing that you want people to take away from this conversation? But it kind of almost sounds like maybe it was that.
That was definitely it. Like, work on your self-trust for sure. Because really, at the end of the day, like, all you have is yourself. You might have a really good partner. You might have really good friends, but you are the one directing your life. And this is your life. Like, this is the life that you get. And I think I spent too long worrying about what other people were going to think about things and worrying about making sure that everybody else was happy over my own happiness. And I think it's so freeing when you get to that point where you're just like, I'm just going to follow what I know I was called to do and what I'm here for. And if they come with me, great. And if they don't, well, we had a nice season.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. To wrap us up, I do 8 rapid fire questions with my guests. If you're down to play, I call it Kind of Toxic, Kind of Well. Essentially what it does is it brings out the humanity of people who seem to have it all together, but it kind of just shows that, we're all just working, working in it all the time. However you feel called to answer. If you don't relate to these things anymore, great. If you've got a good advice tip for it, great. Whatever you think. So
Okay.
I've got these 8. All right.
I'm ready.
What or who are you jealous of right now?
I'm kind of jealous of Kim Kardashian, and I'll tell you why.
Real.
It's like, hello. Yeah. I love how she kind of just lives this, like, I don't really care what people think about me. I'm going to do it anyway. And failing in front of people with her law stuff and still just being like, well, I'll try it again. Love. Love, love, love. And jealous. Like, jealous of her her ability to be where she's at by the time where she is. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like the wisdom that she carries, she's kind of young to have that much wisdom.
For sure. I love that answer. What's a moment recently where you caught yourself ignoring your own needs or that you chose yourself instead?
The dinner thing that I was telling you about with the homemaking, I am so over making dinner. And so I had a little conversation with my husband, and now it's like a shared task a lot more. And I feel really good about that.
I love that. What do you find yourself overthinking about these days?
I think the current events of the world. I've been
Fair.
refreshing I have a lot of friends because I lived in the Middle East for 7 years, so I still have quite a few friends living in the area, and so I'm like checking my phone like a mad woman today, and just, yeah, that's
Scary.
normal, I think, for all of us, right?
For sure. Hopefully.
Yeah.
What is a should, like an expectation that you've put on yourself that you've let go of, or one that you know you still need to?
Oh, I don't believe in shoulds. I think
love that.
one should that I probably need to still let go of is a lot of the business related stuff, like believing, a marketing master has the answer to all of my marketing problems. And so I should be posting this many times a day and like that kind of crap.
Totally. What's something that makes you quick to get annoyed or angry?
When people don't own up to their shit, nothing bothers me more. Just own up to it. I don't care. Yeah, that bothers me.
Yeah. What's a toxic thought you still catch yourself believing?
My not enough stuff still catches me up quite a bit. So I have to keep that in check a lot. Yeah.
What's a wellness rule or trend you don't buy into?
Kind of like what you were sharing about, like, the morning routine and having, starting your day with breakfast and doing this, this, and this. Like, I think all of us have been created so uniquely and so different that, like, doing what is healthiest for you, just do it.
Love it. If you could leave my Wellish friends with one piece of advice on becoming more well than toxic, what advice would you give them?
Heal yourself. Like, really work on your shit. Really. You owe it not just to other people, but you really owe it to yourself.
I love that. Where can people find you in your work?
I'm on Instagram all the time, jessicagraham.storycoach, and you can find me on my website as well. Come to my monthly meetup. It's a journaling circle for women, so it's a good place to practice your inventory taking.
Love that. Amazing. Thank you so much, Jessica. This was so great. I really appreciate talking to people in alignment, and I just think that this was such a good conversation.
Good. I did too. Thank you for having me.